There are plenty of ridiculous offerings the 80s still stings us with decades after it began. Outrageous hair and loud shirts still remain an excellent fixture, synth-pop soundtracks are inescapable, and rose-tinted nostalgia creeps its way into everything from TV adverts to social media trends. So it is hardly a surprise that films are still pulling from the same spandex-clad source material. And when speaking of 80s movies, it is impossible to ignore the impact the era had on horror in particular. I mean, when you're getting A Nightmare on Elm Street, The Shining, and even entries like Society all hitting cinemas in the same 10-year period, you know you're onto something good. And terrifying, but mostly good. So, as always is the case, whilst the world was distracted by all this and similar horrors like Madonna and Pac-Man, there were innumerable underrated horror gems that slipped through the cracks, making now the perfect time to dive back in there and dig up the very best lost treasures. Chuck on your parachute pants and start growing in your mullet, as we're going in. I am the home exercise video, Ash from What Culture, and these are the 10 most underrated 80s horror movies. 10. Shocker. One of Wes Craven's early works, and celebrating his more flamboyant taste in filmmaking, the Scream director's take on an electricity-fueled murderer is big, dumb fun. Stipulated by heavy metal music and dazzling special effects, Craven has created something that is creative, bloody, and that positively sparks with the director's signature weirdness, even if it is not necessarily the best in his back catalogue. Shocker tells the story of a television repairman come serial killer that is sentenced to death in the electric chair. Only, since he's smart enough to get bargaining with the devil before he bites it, he comes back as pure energy. Horace Pinker becomes electricity itself in a bid to take out new victims and hunt down the detective that locked him away in the first place. And it is a live wire of a movie. Yes, Shocker has its faults, and is about as messy as a film about a person turning into a plug socket dwelling nightmare sounds on paper. But truthfully, Shocker deserves far more love for its commitment to its blackly comic premise, especially since it's one that has only gotten more poignant as time has gone on. 9. C.H.U.D, or C.H.U.D. A cult classic for a reason, C.H.U.D's delicious B-movie nonsense is summed up perfectly in its acronym: Cannibalistic Humanoid Underground Dwellers. It does exactly what it says on the tin, intertwining the lives of a photographer who focuses on the subterranean homeless population of New York City and a police officer with a personal connection to a growing list of missing people. The two find their answers to their problems in a radioactive collection of monsters living in the city's sewer system. And they're hungry. C.H.U.D knows exactly what it is, and doesn't try to convince anyone otherwise. Reveling in its cheesy premise and ridiculous creatures, the film is one that remains a firm favourite with genre enthusiasts for its sheer tenacity, surprisingly remaining fairly badly represented over the years since its release. It's one that really puts the under in underrated in any case, considering its narrative and all. 8. The Slumber Party Massacre. One of the rarer older movies that turns the slasher genre on its head and stands as a feminist comment, at least for the time anyway. The Slumber Party Massacre takes advantage of being one of the scant few 80s horrors directed by a woman, Amy Holden Jones. Up against giants like Friday the 13th, The Nightmare on Elm Street, and Halloween, it has been easy for this title to slip between the cracks amidst all the knife-wielding maniacs we get so much of on screen. But throw a power drill in there and we are invested all over again. The Slumber Party Massacre gets pretty literal with its title, describing the plot succinctly as the film plays out. What makes this film underrated, however, despite its simple premise, is how easily it's been dismissed as a rote slasher clone over the years for its subscription to all of the normal beats that have to be hit in these types of movie. The Slumber Party Massacre offers up all of the usual thrills and spills, yes, but does so with a quiet undercurrent of rebellion in its imagery of women. We get fleshed-out female characters and a revelry in its satirical take on the male gaze that defines slasher as a concept. It's understated as much as it is underrated, and deserves all the more love for it. 7. Curtains. We're firmly into slasher territory here with Curtains, a Canadian horror flick that sees the killer in one of the most strangely unsettling masks out there, that of an old hag. Said wrinkly bitch spends most of the movie attempting to cut teens down with a sickle, bringing to life an intense, brilliant, infamous chase scene where a young woman is accosted whilst ice skating in the woods in broad daylight. So much for Canada being nice then. And as with all good slashers, Curtains comes with its own sick brand of killer that has been been born from unfortunate circumstances. A beautiful actor commits herself to a role as a mentally unstable patient by giving herself over to an asylum, only to find that her director has abandoned her and is auditioning other women for the part. She is having absolutely zero of that nonsense, however, and promptly escapes to enact revenge on the group that has double-crossed her. Curtains isn't a name that comes up often in conversations around horror, but as you'll learn from indulging in this mad 80s masterpiece for yourself, it is one that won't go easily forgotten. 6. Q, the Winged Serpent. A film that feels so thoroughly 80s it might as well dress up in a jazzy jumpsuit and spurt hairspray everywhere. Q, the Winged Serpent embodies all the best cheesy antics of the period into one special effects-laden assault on the senses. Of course, as a piece of Larry Cohen's work, Q is in keeping with his trashy, B-movie science fiction vibe, portraying a flying beast that is unwittingly unleashed on Manhattan that makes its deadly home in the Chrysler Building. This isn't just any beastie though, it's an Aztec serpent god hungry for human flesh, rendered through stop motion in a homage to the jerky monster movies that informed the genre originally. Replete with dorky characters and a premise so bizarre it is enjoyable just to listen to, it is a shame that this goofy movie is so often forgotten in recent years. Q might not be the best made film you'll ever see, but its heart more than makes up for what it lacks in its budget. 5. The Gate. While it's not necessarily as frightening as the rest of the movies on this list, The Gate is one of those much-needed horror movies that walks the grey area of more wholesome family fun, opening up the genre to a whole new generation of people without treading too far over the line. And even if that puts you off the concept initially, it shouldn't, as The Gate is a fantastically underrated movie to boot. The titular gate is one best left closed, since it actually functions as a doorway to hell. And where's the last place you want a doorway to hell cropping up? Why, in your back garden, of course. Which is exactly where the damn thing appears for 12-year-old Glenn and his older sister Al after a tree is removed and a hole left behind. When they accidentally complete an ancient ritual, all manner of strange creatures are conjured up from the underworld, leaving the kids to attempt to deal with a whole mess of crap in the aftermath. If you like the Monster Squad or Gremlins, this is certainly one for your shelves. 4. Pumpkinhead. While certainly not unheard of in horror circles the world over, Pumpkinhead is still a title that remains vastly underrated compared to movies of the same ilk. Where other strange 80s creations flourished, like Freddy Krueger and Pinhead, Pumpkinhead has largely been relegated to the shadows, cropping up in cult circles to genre enthusiasts far more often than in wider conversation with your average movie-going pals. And considering just how wonderfully weird both the movie and the creature's conception are, this simply will not do. Pumpkinhead is the story of the titular demon, summoned to take revenge for a boy that was killed in a hit-and-run accident by a desperate father. However, once you conjure the fleshy, claw-fisted, 9-foot genie out of the bottle, as it were, it is far harder to put him back in again, especially when he's on a murderous rampage. The film is a directorial debut of special effects warlock Stan Winston, so you know already that it is packed full of delicious practical work that will send shivers down your spine. Or rip it right out if you're not careful. 3. Silver Bullet. Great werewolf movies are hard to come by. They exist, but far too often are relegated to obscurity in favour of far more fashionable horror icons. I mean, think about how many vampires and zombies we have for a start, with only a few werewolf movies standing the test of time thanks to devoted fan service. The Howling, Dog Soldiers, An American Werewolf in London, and Ginger Snaps will always be beloved. But how often do you hear anyone talking about Silver Bullet? That's not to say it is a great movie, mind, but an entertaining one in the very least. Much like its namesake, the film is an absolute killer when it comes to the werewolf subgenre, offering up a narrative in which a paralytic boy attempts to capture said creature, terrorizing his hometown. Retaining that 80s charm with a healthy dose of humor, the film is exactly the type of thing you'd expect from the peak of Stephen King adaptations taking over horror cinema, meaning you'll have an excellent time whether you're laughing with or at the movie in all of its hammy glory. 2. Stage Fright. If I told you there was a movie about a giant owl man running around and killing off a bunch of actors locked in a theatre for the night as they performed a play about the very same serial killer in some meta-prophecy of their own fates, I'm going to assume that since you're here in the first place, you'd be intrigued at the very least. So, here I am, telling you there is in fact a movie about a giant owl man running around and killing off a bunch of actors as they perform a play about the very same serial killer in some meta-prophecy of their own fates. And it's very good, too. Stage Fright takes on a lovely play on words and spins it into a genuinely unnerving piece, with director Michael Soavi taking full advantage of terrifying costuming and eking out a tense, bloody slasher in a completely original way. Since it came in the late 80s when the world grew tired of rope murderers getting knife-happy on a bunch of annoyingly attractive people, however, it is often overlooked in place of more popular genre efforts. Despite being a refreshing take on slasher concepts with a healthy vein of giallo sensibilities running straight down the middle. 1. The Changeling. By far the most critically appreciated but widely forgotten about film on this list, The Changeling is a tight, spooky story that takes the haunted house framework and runs barefoot into the distance with it, setting fire to the path behind for good measure. Telling the story of a composer, John, that moves into a Victorian mansion following the death of his wife and daughter, he begins to experience phenomena that belie a supernatural influence lurking in the walls of his home, one that uses him to reveal some long-kept dark secrets. Interestingly, perhaps what makes this movie such a success is that it is born from the screenwriter's own experience of a haunted house in the late 60s. Russell Hunter lived in the Henry Treat Rogers mansion during the period, discovering the century-old journal of a young disabled boy that was kept away from the world by his parents. Apparently, the spirit managed to lead him to his remains after a seance, leading to the inspiration behind the movie. Real or not, Hunter's experience informs a wonderfully coiled horror movie, one that stands a head and shoulders above the rest for its pervasive, affecting ghost story. And that's our list. What other 80s horror movies are your favourite? Please share them in the comments section below so we can all celebrate the best of the decade. I've been Ash and this has been What Culture. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe and come back again soon for some more lovely content. Thanks for watching.